Alright, let's talk about Mercy in Overwatch 2's 5v5 environment. Hey everyone, it's Skiesti. I'm sure all of you are wondering, is Mercy good in 5v5? Now that I've played more of the Overwatch 2 beta, I thought I'd take some time to talk in depth about where Mercy fits in a 5v5 environment based on my experiences. My initial thoughts when playing Mercy were that she felt pretty good. However, the more I played her, the more my opinion changed. I will explicitly state that 5v5 feels like a better environment for her on a fundamental level, but there's something about her kit that's lacking. Mercy's kit in the closed beta is the same as the live version of Overwatch 1. The only slight difference is a 2.5 HP per second buff to her self-regeneration passive so that it now sits at 22.5 HP per second instead of 20 HP per second. Mercy herself hasn't really changed, but her environment has, which I think is the most accurate statement to make about her right now. I genuinely feel like Mercy is missing something, and it seems like I'm not alone in that line of thought. I want to say, first and foremost, that buffing her pistol is not the answer. I'm going to go absolutely feral if I keep hearing suggestions that she needs to do more damage. If you want to play a support that does damage, choose any of the other 6 support heroes instead of Mercy. Mercy's playstyle is not geared toward her pistol, nor should it be. Please stop. With that out of the way, I'm not a developer. I won't pretend I know anything about game balance because I don't. I'm only going to speak to my experience and feelings after playing her for hours almost every day since the beta released. I feel like what Mercy is missing perhaps lies in her survivability, her mobility, her lack of a burst heal, or her lack of ability to do more than one thing at a time. Right now, Mercy doesn't feel like she competes with the other healers. She's even more niche than she was in Overwatch 1. Mercy was the only support with a regeneration passive in Overwatch 1 because all the other supports have the ability to heal themselves where she does not. In Overwatch 2, all supports have a regen passive now and the ability to heal themselves on top of that, with the exception of Mercy, who still only has her regen passive. In addition to that, other supports can do things simultaneously, which is another ability Mercy doesn't have. Mercy can either heal, damage boost, or res. She can never do any of those things at the same time. Heck, she can't even pop Valkyrie and beam someone at the same time. In 5v5, these two things put her at a significant disadvantage to other supports. So let's talk about Mercy's new environment. One less tank creates better viability for Mercy since less healing is required. Due to this, Mercy can focus where her main value comes from, which is damage boost to enable her team. As long as you understand where your value comes from and know how to commit with your DPS to enable them, you should be able to fulfill Mercy's role in most cases. If you're more of a healing Mercy and are not sure why pocketing is so valuable, I'll explain quickly. Pocketing DPS allows them to be more aggressive, take more angles, apply more pressure, keep their position, have a higher likelihood to survive, and, of course, amplify their damage output. Even if your DPS isn't hitting as many shots as you think they should be, they're still doing damage, and they're still contributing, and your assistance is important to them to do so. With the loss of a tank brings less protection. The loss of protection creates vulnerability mostly for the supports. It's why I assume all of the supports were given a slightly weaker version of Mercy's previously unique passive, despite all of them already having different ways to heal themselves, like we discussed earlier. With that said, Mercy players need to have a good understanding of how to use their environment as cover. They will need to be great with her movement and know about her various Guardian Angel techs to be able to survive. A few examples of those techs, if you don't know them, would be like super jump, bunny hop, prop jumps, wall bounces, and that doesn't even begin to scratch the surface of tech she's capable of. So, long story short, if you're not good with her movement, you're in for a terrible time. I'm so sorry. With the loss of an additional teammate to fly to, which we'll talk more about later, you have less escape options. It becomes even more important to utilize her higher level mobility to survive and perform better as Mercy with fewer options. You need to be able to utilize Mercy's higher level mobility to survive and perform better as her with fewer options. Mercy players that can survive are going to be rewarded more than those who can't. With that said, even when you do objectively outmaneuver your enemies, there's still a good chance you eventually won't survive, because either the enemy is dedicated, your team doesn't peel for you or heal you because of your passive, you catch a stray bullet, whatever it might be. There's a lot of different possibilities there. These possibilities make it so something you should be rewarded for actually feels incredibly bad, which is a big problem for her. Since there's less protection, there's more pressure on you. Mercy is harder to play in Overwatch 2 from a survivability standpoint because enemies can more freely run after you with less punishment. As a result of that, Mercy is unable to fly around as freely as she could before, since you run the risk of leaving yourself vulnerable to dangerous sightlines. As well, despite the short cooldown on Guardian Angel, enemy DPS are able to catch up to you easier because of their 10% speed buff passive. With all of these things in mind, you have to learn to rely on yourself so much more in 5v5. With all these negatives, you must be wondering, why is 5v5 even better for her then? The way her kit works, at a fundamental level, thrives more in a 5v5 environment where there's one less tank. You worry less about if your second healer can keep your tank alive or if your second healer can stay alive themselves. This allows you to more reliably commit to pocketing your DPS. While the environment is better for her, her kit is lacking a few adjustments to actually make her feel good to play. When it comes to protection, having less of it for Mercy is a kind of double-edged sword. DPS are able to take more duels that matter more, and a good DPS can make space if they're landing their shots. In a 5v5 environment, it becomes much more noticeable if your DPS aren't hitting their shots or able to apply pressure. Your own value as Mercy will significantly diminish if the players you are there to enable are severely underperforming. If you off-angle with your DPS, which is Mercy's usual state, there's a risk of either you two being pushed or your frontline being pushed and dying before you and your DPS are able to get value. On the other side of that, if your DPS is doing well, your damage does more because there's less peel and protection for the enemy DPS and their backline. I have a few more additional comments before we go into her technical nerfs and buffs in a 5v5 environment that I haven't touched on yet. As far as pairing Mercy with an off healer goes, it feels more viable than in Overwatch 1. It's still not better than running Mercy alongside a main healer because with Zen, Lucio, or Brig, Mercy has to focus heal on her tank, and with her healing, it just feels like it takes an eternity to do. All I really have to say is that Mercy plus an off healer is slightly less of a pain, and while it still had its annoying moments, I didn't necessarily hate it. Also, a hot take, Mercy Lucio might be better than Mercy Zen now. Compared to 6v6, in 5v5 it feels like the plays you make as Mercy have more impact even though it's pretty subtle. I've had a handful of fights that looked lost, but by using Valk and either sustaining my team, getting a kill with my pistol, or rezzing, the fight was able to be turned. In Overwatch 1, it felt like there were very rarely moments like this. You have to know when to play aggressive versus when to play defensive. While you should prioritize being passive and safe, there are more opportunities to be aggressive since there's less protection for heroes with low health pools. You need to learn when to turn a fight by going in with your pistol, when you can get a more aggressive res, when you should just commit with your DPS, or when you can win a fight just by surviving and keeping your team alive. Okay, so this feels like where you'd ask someone if they want to hear the good news or the bad news first. So I'm gonna start with the bad news for Mercy players. There are some technical nerfs that Mercy has received as a result of changes implemented in 5v5. The first technical nerf is to her resurrection. Because of how fast-paced Overwatch 2 is, Mercy has less opportunities to res safely because it takes too long, which makes a significant ability of hers harder to use. The next technical nerf impacts pocketing. Due to the new DPS passive, which makes DPS heroes move 10% faster, Mercy will now go out of range after about 3 seconds at max beam range. Your DPS is more likely to leave you behind because they outpace you around the environment. If you're a Mercy that normally plays at max beam range, which you should be doing in most cases, you'll find your DPS outpacing you frequently. You'll have to pay more attention to the distance between you and your DPS pocket target to make sure you stay in range of them. Moving on, a technical nerf that I want to point out that also has some upsides, which I'll mention in the technical buffs later. With the 5v5 format, Mercy has one less person to use as a Guardian Angel target. Instead of having 5 potential escapes or targets to fly between, you only have 4. These 4 targets will also probably be playing more spread out, making them harder to get to. With more back and forth, there's more danger. For that reason, you'll have to pay more attention to your own movement and be more careful and thoughtful about who you're using as a GA target and where you're going next. And lastly, we talked about this a lot earlier, but again, less protection is also inherently a nerf for Mercy. The lack of protection comes in two different forms. The first one is not having another tank to protect you. The second one is that your other support is much less likely to heal or peel for you, since every support has a regen passive now. Mercy, again, is at a further disadvantage as her self-regen is her only form of healing for herself. With all of that said, 5v5 is not without buffs to Mercy. Performing a bunny hop at the end of a Guardian Angel slingshot was made so much easier in Overwatch 2. I can only assume this is to assist Mercy's mobility to increase her survivability. The GA slingshot is a common Mercy tech. It's performed by holding down jump during Guardian Angel when you reach your target to go further. In Overwatch 1, to perform a bunny hop, you had to GA to your target, cancel GA, and then press jump before you reach the ground to hop. In Overwatch 2, when you perform a GA slingshot, you can bunny hop at the end of it very easily by jumping just before you reach the ground. This gives you even more distance than a normal slingshot and is not possible to do in Overwatch 1. The main component of Overwatch 2 is to increase the individual contribution of players. Mercy's primary job is to enable her teammates, and because there's more potential for individual contribution, her ability to enable that contribution becomes more powerful and lethal. Mercy lacks the same carry potential that other supports have, because her carry potential is traded for a stronger amplifying modifier to boost the carry potential of her teammates. One annoyance playing Mercy was always the difficult decision between peeling back for your second support or committing with your DPS. You basically had to decide if committing with your DPS was your condition to win a fight, or if the life of your other support needed to take priority. If you're flanking with your DPS, you aren't going to be able to get across the map to peel for your other support, and if you're peeling for your support, you're leaving your DPS vulnerable. With the introduction of Mercy's regeneration passive at a slightly smaller scale to all other supports, as I mentioned before, peeling for your second support becomes much less necessary. And that doesn't mean you should flat out ignore them. Don't do that. However, you can much more comfortably commit with your DPS completely, knowing that your other support just has to not take damage for a second to be able to regen. And on top of that, they have their healing abilities that they can use on themselves if necessary. I feel like, despite being very anti-Battle Mercy, I have to add this last point. If anyone has seen me play before, you'll know that I'm a very passive Mercy player, and if you haven't, I stream almost every day over at twitch.tv/Skiesti. Anyway, I play to enable my team and very rarely go for pistol plays. But since there's less protection from a second tank, targets with lower health pools become much easier targets. Because of this, I found that I was pulling out my pistol much more. Now, I'm not here to encourage Battle Mercy or anything, but when the opportunity to pistol presents itself, it's much easier to take advantage of it within reason if your team can afford you doing so. That's all from me for now. I struggled a lot to organize all my thoughts on Mercy now that I've been playing the beta consistently for a while. What are your thoughts on Mercy? I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Thank you so much for watching as always, and I will see you next time.